welcome all to the episode number 2 of the Zero to One, a journey into the Filecoin ecosystem. This is the time where we spend with you, the new storage providers. Maybe you're looking to get into the ecosystem, answering all the important questions that you may have on what it's like to be a Filecoin storage provider. With always is my fabulous co-host from Brussels, Mr. Bob Dubois. Bob, how are we doing today?
Good. It's later than usual, but it's still good.
Hey, what they say about crypto is 24/7. I know
That
you
is true.
don't sleep. And with us today, we have two special guests, Angelo Shalley from Protocol Labs, who is also his own storage provider. Angelo, how's it going?
Pretty good. Not so late for me. I'm in the US, so perfect timing.
And Stefan from Vigilant IT, yet another guest from Down Under. Thank you for joining today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So, what the people want to know about is what it's like to run a storage provider business within Filecoin. Stefan, I really want to start off with you, given that you've been at this game for a little bit. Take me back to the analysis that you did that made you jump into this pool called Filecoin.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So yeah, it was about two and a half years ago when we first looked at what could be on the network, and we basically started with a surprise an Excel spreadsheet. So what we started doing is effectively mapping the trying to map every single ROI block rewards that we could do, and say line by line, this is what we expect to see over time, and say, look, with some predictions of block rewards expectations, we can through literally a spreadsheet of about to say this is kind of what we expect to see roughly rough. So one of the things that we then said was, okay, that spreadsheet has to be a live document, right? It can't be something that we said in stone match. So we kind of made sure that on a monthly basis, we reviewed our estimations and seeing what the trend was, and if it was matching, and if not, modify it.
What did you get right back then, and what did you get horribly wrong?
So what we got right is the trend, right? The trend on ROI, which is excellent. What we got wrong is effectively the investments that we needed to make in order to get started. So in essence, because of trial error, we saw the ROI was positive, which is great. This is what you want to see. But at the same time, we over the months that followed, we realized that our guesstimate on capex and what our opex would be would be quite underestimated.
Yeah. Angela, how about you? When you look back to when you decided to take the plunge, what did the model look like to you back then?
Well, very similar to Stefan. I mean, you try to pull it apart day by day at first in a spreadsheet. I think everybody dives into a big spreadsheet, like looking at what OPEX and CAPEX could mean to you. I mean, to me, it was more like the tech itself that really lured me in. I saw a lot of utility in the token itself. Moved data directly from my business into Filecoin straight away from the cloud. Gives some benefit, lowering costs. That also, played a big part in the ROI part for me. So it was like two-sided, right? Lowering cost and like optimizing it on the Filecoin side. So build a lot of confidence for me looking forward that would definitely make sense to me. And yeah, I got a lot of customers at the time along or aligned with that same vision. So yeah, that made a lot of sense. And I don't know how Stefan looked at it, but I also looked at it like very worst case scenario. I think everybody tries to do that in their ROI model. And I know at the beginning, Filecoin made some big jumps here and there on pricing, but I always looked at it from a worst case scenario, and that still looks very good looking into the future for me. So
yeah, so what we have planned for everyone today is we're going to go through some ROI modeling for being a storage provider. And Bob, before we jump into that, you're talking to new storage providers or prospective storage providers every day. What are some of the main questions you keep hearing from people looking to get into the Filecoin community?
Well, specifically to the subject of ROI is how to estimate the ROI with the volatile microeconomics around everything, Filecoin, crypto in general, the whole stock market now as well. So how to plan for a positive ROI with all the factors you cannot plan for. So apart from all the technical challenges or goodies that there are to uncover around Filecoin, I mean, having a vision and a roadmap that doesn't break the bank in the long run is a good thing. And what I heard here is like, okay, going for a worst case scenario is definitely a good starting point.
Yeah, and I'll say my answer to that question is I think everyone's looking to scale up their business when they enter the ecosystem. So they're like, all right, what's the level I need to be looking at before I raise my first round of seed capital? What's the level I get to before I raise my next level of capital? Because ultimately, they're always trying to scale their business. And when you have those goals and you have these milestones about raising external capital, you need to understand your business model to know that what you can expect to show from a cash flow perspective or a block rewards perspective in each of those major milestones. And that becomes especially important for those just starting out because they want to get to a point of profitability. They want to be attractive to external investments. And that way they can really take their game to the next level. So Angela, I want to turn it over to you so we can walk through just a few scenarios on Opex versus CapEx, starting small, going big, and what does it look like to be a raw byte provider versus a Fill Plus storage provider. And like these are all represent a lot of the common questions we get from storage providers starting off. And we figured with all of us here today, there's no better way to get to these answers than to dive right into it. So Angela, why don't you take it away and show us what you built?
Okay, well, let me see. I'll just share the calculator right away. Let me pull that up for you. Everybody can see my screen? Should be popping up right now. Cool. So let's dive in. Okay. So this is the basis that we're starting off. I recognize or remember all the questions you put out there, Porter, but I'll try to cover as much as possible. Like from the small versus big analogy that you brought up, I think that's a good one. Scaling is always a question, right? Like every conversation that you have with SPs, is it, should I, step in? What is the perfect size? When does it start to become interesting? My personal opinion would be 1 petabyte. That's the sweet spot. Starting from there, things become very predictable. So 1 petabyte of raw storage is my way to move forward. Now, you can combine that with Fill Plus data. That becomes preferably at like, let's say, 100% Fill Plus. That becomes like a large data set of 10 pips of QAP on chain. That could be a lot for a lot of people. Looking at what you need for that, you need like around almost 8,000 Fill as on collateral to fund that. So try to look at it from a perspective like what is the sweet spot on a lot of it. So you can play around with this. I think playing around with like how much Fill Plus data you're actually going to do is what I pulled in my ROI calculator a lot. So looking at from the perspective of how much is my infrastructure on the OPEX side and on the CapEx side, very important to look at, because you're looking at the raw stuff, right? You're not looking at the QAP at that point. You're looking at how much is OPEX and CapEx going to be for me, starting, for instance, at 1 pip raw. So try to pull that together in this model here, in this storage provider ROI forecast model. And when you look at it, 1 pip of raw capacity, that will, you know, looking at like a lot of other storage providers and having some conversation at the ecosystem, that would bring you down around, like I would say tier 1 OPEX. I'll dive into what that means in a second. And most people that are doing like 1 pip of raw capacity scaling up, they would be around 6 to 10 tips a day on sealing capacity, which you can also play around a little bit here, between 6 and 10, for instance. Kind of give you an idea on what your initial investment would be to get you started. And then if you look at like the calculator itself, like moving around with the amount of like verified deals that you would be pulling in, your OPEX or CapEx doesn't really change that much because of the infrastructure itself doesn't change. So looking at that perspective, going bigger really ties into how much verified data can I pull in at that point. So that kind of defines on, you know, how does my model look like in the future? This is something that I definitely looked into a lot, and my own model is focused on trying to achieve 100% of verified data. That's what I try to do, which makes it the most interesting moving forward. Now, there's a few things you need to be aware of. Moving forwards, there is always this part of like, how safe am I gonna play it, right? Talking about that worst case scenario, I think about like, what does happen if my infrastructure has a certain like malfunction or something goes wrong at the data center? Am I equipped for that? So having a backup of all the sectors that you're sealing is one of the things that I would definitely take into account. Like that will, you know, impact your OPEX and CapEx a good bit. So you can, like, that's a choice, but that's kind of like an insurance that you'll be putting in. Then of course there is the part of like, are you storing replica sets, for instance, for other people, or are you storing data for your own customers? This is something that you can weigh off on when it comes to storing unsealed copies or not, which, you know, provides better retrievability. So that would also impact your CapEx at that point, because it's all storage on top of storage that you'll be providing to the network. So backup is an extra copy of your sectors. Unsealed copies is, again, an extra copy of your sectors, but then the unsealed data itself. So all of that, that's the amount of storage. Now, going up, I mean, you see that like doing all this, like making sure that your infrastructure is running, making sure that everything is backed up and available, making sure that the data keeps flowing, all that work kind of comes into this OPEX model as well. And you see adding all this does have a lot of impact on your potential forecasts. Right now at like $5.7 per fill, which it is today. So maybe to your answer or to your question, Porter, on scale, that would definitely look different. Because if you look at, for instance, if somebody would grow to 10 petabytes, which also raw, keeping it 100% verified deals would be my suggestion. You'll be in a different tier. The tiering here is between between 1, 2, and 3 is how much pull do I need to run my business? Let's put it that way. How big of a company am I? See it like that. See these OPEX models as like a preset configuration provided in this tool, kind of saying tier 1 is I'll able to manage this all on my own. I can assure you, when you're growing to 10 pip a day, and you're managing data coming in, you'll definitely be at tier 2. You'll be handling this with multiple people, potentially as an extra department or business within your current size of company, and then moving into like the more ceiling capacity as well. So this becomes all very important to keep in mind when you're forecasting this. And then even going bigger, which can go up to 35, for instance, going into tier 3, which is like you're becoming a full-fledged storage provider on large scale. Like we're talking very large scale here. You will be taking a lot more people on to manage that. And then the profitability also grows, but you'll have a lot more upfront cost, which you'll need to, like pass that chasm, I guess, to get there. Now, there's a few things maybe that I can highlight on more on the new storage providers when they come in. If I just pull it back to one pip, and put the capacity, for instance, on let's say 12 or something like that. Looking at ramping up your ceiling of all that data, you can potentially look at how that would look like as ceiling as a service in the future that's coming. That would definitely impact your CapEx in a very positive way, because you won't need as much ceiling equipment. You will only need equipment for your daemon, your miner, and your window and winning post workers. And that will definitely also impact your overall outcome that way. So there are multiple ways that you can leverage profitability, but even at what we're looking at right now at almost $6, looking into the future and looking into the amount of Filecoin that you will be producing through block rewards, profitability is definitely there. Like my worst case scenario is closer to $2.50 to $3, where it comes a little interesting and tricky. You'll need to look at your Opex and CapEx model really closely. Does that cover most of what you just mentioned, Porter?
I got a question for Stefan. As Angelo was playing around with the calculator, you see the 18 months, 36 months, and 54 months numbers swing dramatically. And Filecoin's only been around for just a handful of years now, and perhaps we're not thinking about 54-month timelines, and especially with all that's going on, and like this is still such a new ecosystem, relatively speaking. How do you think about like short-term versus long-term?
Just to correct you there, I do look at long-term and 54 months ahead of time. I think the main thing that I would say is any ROI that you do today on the network, you have to make it, you have to keep it dynamic, right? In a traditional business model, you would probably do an ROI and base your calculation on a year, on 3 years, and then fix them. And at the end of the first year, you look back and you see, did we make it? Did we not make it? And then adapt it. I think in this world, in the Filecoin world, it has to happen a lot faster. So you have to be a lot more dynamic and review your calculation. I would say, if not on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, and just go, okay, the ROI is changing. It's either going up or it's going slightly down. How do we adapt to that? How do we pivot and potentially even change the business model on the go based on what the calculation at the time returns?
Question from the chat is, I know we don't have this feature embedded in the tool yet, but how do you account for block rewards going both upwards and downwards? As right now we have downward trending block rewards. How do you factor that into your short-term and long-term modeling? Either one of you.
Well, I'll take that one. And maybe you can add something later to that, Stefan, because how I see it going down right now, I think we're around 17 Filecoin per block, a little bit higher maybe, coming from 19 almost a couple of months ago. Now, what I did in the calculator itself is you can model this out like to 10 if you want to, right? Because you don't know 100% what that's going to look like in the future. Now, what that would help you is that you can model it multiple ways. So that's how I do it. I will, like, for instance, do 5.5, which is the bare minimum that it would ever be, and then 5.5, like let's say 6, 7, 8, all the way up to what it is right now. Put that in a spreadsheet and kind of see how that trend looks like for your business. So you kind of know when you need to be maybe looking at, can I lower Opex or CapEx, or is there something that you need to change in your model or not? But I'll definitely look at it. And that option, which right now is fixed because of what the state is right now, will be pulled in dynamically, but will still give you the option to play around with it, because you do need to know if it goes lower, what that impact is for you. I don't know if you want to add something to that, Stefan.
Yeah, no, look, that's spot on. What we always do is account for. So when you say in earlier, you said, you know, look at worst case scenario. I think it's important to look at worst case scenario, look at best case scenario, and the truth is going to be somewhere in between on an average basis. So what you're doing there is effectively right to say, look, you know what the block reward is today. You don't know what the block reward is going to be in 6 months' time. Therefore, let's try and map that out and say, well, worst case, it's at this level. Best case, it would be at that level. And then, you know, compare the two and see how you can determine your ROI based on that.
And it's maybe a very obvious statement to make, but I still want to make it. It's better to have a low block reward with a high fill price than a low fill price with a high block reward.
That's definitely true. That's a good assessment, Bob. Yeah, it's also very honest looking at it, because, you know, the future, what the economy we're in right now, the future looks a lot better to me than the economy is right now. So for me, this is definitely a no-brainer. Even if the block rewards go down, fills go up, burn and the collateral goes down as well, with the block rewards going down per at that rate. So there is a good balance, I think, to be found.
As you look at your calculator, as you know, all the inputs and variables that we have on the screen here, how would you encourage a potential storage provider looking to take the plunge into modeling out how they get started? So, like, again, we talk about one pip raw. What can we help clarify for them from a business model perspective, as they, you know, they're probably like asking their friends and family for money. They're probably pulling money out of their own bank accounts. They're excited about this because, probably like you, Angelo, it's part of their professional identity where they're excited about the technology. And ultimately, you know, what we love to do is to give them some confidence through whatever means possible that this is a sound investment. Whether it's in the calculator or from your own experience, what would you tell that person?
I would just say go for it. It's a good investment, but that's maybe too easy. No, I had these conversations a lot, also with family members. It's like, yeah, how can it look that good? I'm like, always look at it from now into the future. Don't look at it like, oh, let's see how it looks like next month or in a couple of months. Look at it at more of a perspective of, what is my investment into this doing in 18 months or 54 months? Look at it more into the future. And then, you know, your OPEX and CAPEX will be covered. You can model this out in a spreadsheet and get into way more detail, and it would tell you the same. I've been over these calculations a lot, and even looking at it day by day, and maybe Stefan can jump into that as well. Day by day, you will see in the beginning, it will be like an investment for a while, and at a certain point you will break even, and it will go up no matter what it looks like right now. So I mean, just the confidence that it gives me on modeling so many different scenarios is it also giving me a lot of confidence to tell people that and show that. And that's also why the calculator is built that way is to give you a forecast into the future and not just telling you, oh, today is today and the next day and the day after is giving you these very specific numbers. No, you want to know like, what is my business like viability into the future? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'll throw it over to Stefan. A lot of this is really a balance between OPEX and CAPEX. And CAPEX is a really good tool or lever to pull at a certain scale. When did you really lean into the CAPEX side of your business versus OPEX?
Well, early on, we decided to move a lot of our CAPEX into OPEX. So our initial CAPEX is extremely low for us because we lease hardware. We have so effectively for us the OPEX model made a lot more sense than to go down the path of CAPEX. That being said, that's not specifically the case for everybody, right? It all depends on your situation, on what if you have investors that are happy to go in this with you, if it's your own personal money, it's, you know, do you have an existing business that would allow you to do 100% OPEX to start with? So these are all very subjective questions that every single one of new SP would have to look into a bit more closer to see what best model suits them.
What's your one, if someone leaning heavily OPEX to start their business, such as you have, what would be your one tip for them?
Start small enough that you can trial and error, because the very first thing that I would say is you're going to make errors along the way on, you know, what hardware to buy, how much hardware to buy, how do you set it all up, how do you manage it. So these are the things that you should be careful of when you go into it, and effectively do your testing, do your due diligence first before you put up the big money to start a one people rule operation. But then once you have that initial testing and you're confident that your calculations are right, I would say don't procrastinate too much on going ahead with it. I found that the faster you inject the CAPEX/OPEX, the faster the returns start to come. But all that I'll put a blanket all over that and say I would never tell anyone, and I would never give any financial advice to anybody, right? I'm not a financial person, and I would always preface everything like this with saying, you know, like any other blockchain, the cryptocurrency world is quite volatile, so it's a high risk, high reward scenario. So just do your due diligence is what I would say.
I'd like to add something to the OPEX and CAPEX. From like when you moved a lot to the OPEX model, Stefan, I agree it's a really good model to look at, but then I do want to like pivot it a little bit to the CAPEX model for a reason that sealing as a service is coming. This is one of the things that especially I think newer SPs would be very interested in, because the impact on CAPEX is enormous. When you go for sealing as a service, one is your CAPEX would go down, your OPEX would go down because you have a lot of sealing equipment that you don't need to manage anymore and don't need to buy. But also that ramp up period that you just talked about, like getting started right away, is very short. Like to give you an idea, when you invest into CAPEX or OPEX, doesn't matter, on the sealing equipment, you choose a certain amount of sealing rate, right? And that would be, I mean, depending on how large you want to go, that will ramp between, you know, a couple of tips to hundreds of tips. But when you go for sealing as a service, I think it starts at 100 tips right away without having to do the investment on the sealing side. So that is definitely a big win there.
When you guys look at your models, what makes you nervous besides the price?
For me, that would be the data itself that makes me nervous. The moment that because I'm trying to focus on as much verified data as well, which is also the most useful in my opinion, because you know where it's coming from and what it is. If you really go like 50% or lower, your forecast is going to look a lot less good at this. Even if you like slide it for 1 pip, if you go below, your returns will definitely lower. Of course, you have less to invest, but your returns will also be a lot less. So definitely that part is something that I get nervous about right now. I think the most important thing on becoming a new SP or your current one is like building those relationships in the ecosystem and spending time with connecting with other SPs or data preppers, and then kind of keep that data flow going and then optimize your infrastructure for it. That would be my one thing. Yeah.
Stefan, based on your experience, what's not in the model that has a significant impact on your bottom line?
I think, and it's highlighted there on the form, is the if you're going to go to a lender to get fills to get started, that is currently not on that model, which could impact the numbers because of the interest rates that you would pay back. Those interest rates on fill loans being in fill and not in fiat, so it does have an impact because that interest rate is fixed for the duration of the contract. So that would be a great addition to this calculator, and Angelo is already putting it down there in red that he will add that as a work in progress a bit later.
I also think that's a very good addition because people need to know that up front. It's like taking on a mortgage. You need to know what's happening with your with all the modeling up front. So yeah, that's definitely coming in the next version. Probably next week or the week after it will be released, and it's being built right now. If you really want to know the impact right now, most of the lenders, they, like you said, Stefan, they do around 20% or maybe 22, depending on the size. What you can do is they will take it off your block rewards to pay it back. That's their model right now. So you kind of, if you lower the block rewards by the amount of the percentage that you have in mind, that would give you a very rough estimate on how that would look like right now. So that could be a way of playing around with it a little bit. But yeah, it's better to have it built in. So that's definitely coming.
Yeah, what's interesting is like when a lot of the people just entering for the first time, they're bringing their own Filecoin to the table for the pledge collateral, which is a great way to start, especially because you're not going to have a lot of credit as a business to go out and borrow in the markets. So, a lot of people ask a lot of questions about lending. It's a new phenomenon for them. It's very unique it's a critical part to Filecoin, mostly because storage providers want to limit their price exposure. You already take on enough risk as a storage provider. Price exposure and managing that price exposure is not something that a lot of storage providers want to dedicate their time and resources to. So that's why a lot of storage providers tend to quickly graduate into the borrowing model with our lending community. Stefan, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Porter. I was nodding there because that's exactly what we did. So we started off with buying fills, and we ended more on the lending side of things now. On the borrowing, sorry.
What's the best part of not starting or just starting with your own fill versus borrowing?
Well, clearly the impact on the fill price on the market doesn't impact your balance sheet. That's the biggest impacts, really. And that's, to me, it makes sense as a model to not have that impact on your balance sheet. There's already enough that you have to worry about without having to worry about that bit. So yeah, that would be the biggest thing.
Bob, you've been awfully quiet over there.
I am, because you're asking all those good questions. What I have on my lips is there a too small of a size to start off with, or a too big of a size? I mean, the 1 pip raw has been mentioned before, but 1 pip raw equals to like 80,000 fill in collateral nowadays. So that, or 8,000, no, 8,000. But in QAP, that's 80,000 in collateral. So that is already quite a starting point. Wouldn't it be beneficial to start lower for some of us, or for most of us, or is that just a too low starting point?
I don't think so. It depends on how you can model your OPEX and CAPEX. My original setup would be 100 tip. That was my original thought. I thought, like, just play around with it. I only need 50 tip for my use case, so let's do 100 to make sure that it's covered. And I just grew further and further because I saw scaling was very beneficial. But I think you can make it work 100 tip and higher. If you go below 100 tip, that's the area I wouldn't touch on. Absolutely not. But below that could get difficult. But over 100 tips, especially in combination with Fill Plus, and if you're very, handy with tech, and you could maybe build some things on your own, get something with the second-hand market going, and you can maintain a lot yourself, or you have like some infrastructure at home, even that could serve as a data center. You can make it work starting at 100 tips, but that's really depends on. Yeah.
Of all the variables that you don't have control over, like fill price and block rewards, Opex and CapEx, you can control to a certain extent.
Yes, those are factors that you just need to take in and make some assumptions, right? But also this model here, even if a tip, if you take 1 pip or you take 100 tip, modeling with this forecast calculator, you still see the impact of fill price, the block rewards, the collateral. You can play around it. You can even play around with it, like looking from I want to do 100 tips, but I want to do 100% fill plus that equals 1 pip raw. Just keep the fill plus on 0 to give you like the numbers to play with and kind of model it out that way. That helps you. Don't look at the forecast, the profit in USD, because that doesn't look that great when you just do CC or non-verified data. But I would definitely give it a try.
But that is because of the Opex and the CapEx. If you were only at 100 tip raw, you can drastically lower your Opex and your CapEx, and it will turn out to be positive.
Yeah, you're
questions,
right.
A couple of questions in the chat before we run out of time here today. Any plans for PL to start as the fill provider for collateral? I'll take that one. So Protocol Labs works in conjunction with Anchorage and Dharma Capital to help new storage providers get lending as they begin to grow their business. So, and those are even further amplified by those new storage providers that participate in our ESPA Accelerator program. Even more of a reason, as you learned last month, to participate in ESPA. Next question, Angela, I'll have you take this one. What's the opportunity for FVM for storage providers, and any hardware upgrades required for FVM?
I would more look at like the DFI side for FVM. The lending part, keeping everything fill on fill, that would be very interesting on that part. So you don't have to go out and buy fill as collateral, but like leverage lending pools through FVM. That's one thing. Data deals coming in, how I talked about getting that data flow, keep that going. I think FVM will play a great part in that, because of the deal duration of deals need to be kept like on a renewal rate every 540 days, while in the future that might be extended, but right now that's 540 days. FVM would help with keeping that perpetual. So on that part, those two things are very interesting towards FEM.
Next question, I'll kick it over to Stefan. What are some of the hardware providers that you would recommend working with?
Oh, that's a very tough question. So, you know, and again, it's a very, very subjective choice, right? I'll preface with that. We work with HPE. That's who we work with. We've always had a long-standing relationship with them. That being said, they're not better or worse than a Dell, a Lenovo, an Asus, a Gigabyte. There's so many providers out there that can deliver you good hardware. Some are more expensive than others. So depending if you're going to go down the path of becoming what we define as an enterprise storage provider or a non-enterprise storage provider. So if you're going to start off and say, I want to do a 100 TB or even a PIB raw at home, I would probably suggest to go down the path of the self-build model where you source the components and build your own hardware. If you're going to go down the path of trying to be an enterprise storage provider, where you then look at hosting in a data center with enterprise grade hardware, then I would probably start to contact the big vendors out there, which also can give you some good leasing options like what we did.
Excellent. And final question, if you could leave our audience with one point, one reflection about being a storage provider and the business model it entails, what would you leave them with? Angelo, you first.
I think I mentioned it already, I would go for it. I mean, if the model looks good, I think it's important for you to see in the future and try to model it out and see how the forecast looks and just try to prove it to yourself. You dive into it, you dive into the matter, and it will come clear to you. But it's a lot to digest.
Stefan.
Yeah, I would second that with Angelo. I'd say go for it. It's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work too. So don't underestimate the amount of work and hours required to set up, but then after that, maintain the systems.
All right. Thank you both for such a enlightening conversation. For all of you on the call, please join Filecoin Slack. And also follow us on Twitter at FilecoinSP. And we look forward to seeing you next week, where we dive deeper into hardware and how to look at your hardware investments, especially starting out. Thank you all. See you next month.